Welcome to the debate. So, when did you last ask whether the way you are leading still feels like you?
Yeah, that's a heavy question.
It is right. And if you're a founder or an executive or a senior leader listening to this, you probably know the exact friction we are talking about. It's that, precarious moment when you realize you're no longer leading from your true inner voice.
Mm. Instead, you're performing a version of leadership.
Exactly. A persona built to absorb compounding expectations, handle immense responsibility, and project absolute certainty, even when you feel completely disconnected on the inside.
Right. And today we're exploring this crisis of leadership identity through Mousaab Khaldi's Four Empires framework.
Yeah, and specifically, we're debating the framework's starting point, which is day one, the immediate physical and cognitive rewiring of the leader. My position is that reclaiming your prefrontal cortex, specifically through targeted neurobiological protocols in the first hour of your day, is the absolute biological prerequisite for rebuilding an authentic leadership identity. You just can't lead as your true self if your brain is stuck in survival mode.
Well, and while I agree that the biological foundation is critical, my position is that leading a transformation with cognitive optimization runs a massive, often unspoken risk.
How so?
Because, if you take a disconnected, burned out high achiever and hand them protocols focused on strategic dominance and cognitive command, you're very likely just upgrading their armor.
Interesting.
You're building a more efficient imposter rather than actually reclaiming their true leadership identity.
Okay, but let's ground this in the reality of what a leader is physically experiencing when they hit that wall. Leadership identity is not just a philosophical concept, right? It's not your job title or a polished public image.
No, definitely not.
It's how you make decisions under pressure. It's how you relate to your team when things go wrong. And that behavior is dictated entirely by your neural architecture. If you're operating under the crushing weight of a company's survival, running on 5 hours of sleep, your amygdala, the brain's threat detection center, has effectively hijacked your nervous system. You default to a hyper-vigilant sympathetic nervous system state.
The classic fight-or-flight response.
Empire, specifically the 5 to 6 a.m. 20-20-20 protocol.
Right, the day one protocol.
Yeah, this isn't just about waking up early to get a head start on emails. It is a precise intervention to break that physiological panic. It starts with 20 minutes of intense physical movement.
To flush the cortisol.
Right, because raising your heart rate flushes the stagnant cortisol that's been pooling in your system from chronic stress. Then, 20 minutes of reflection and breath work. And this isn't just sitting quietly. Deep diaphragmatic breathing mechanically stimulates the vagus nerve, sending a literal, physical signal to your brain that says, "We are safe."
Forcing the parasympathetic shift.
Yes, moving you to that rest and digest state. Only then do you spend 20 minutes on learning, feeding the prefrontal cortex now that the alarm bells are turned off. You just cannot lead authentically when your nervous system is wildly dysregulated.
Look, I don't dispute the biology of vagal tone or cortisol flushing. That's sound.
Okay.
What I dispute is handing this specific tool set to the specific psychological profile of a high achiever, without first addressing their core fragmentation. We're dealing with individuals who are already absolute experts at discipline.
That's true, yeah.
They're masters at grinding through pain and optimizing their time. If you take an exhausted executive whose entire identity is tied up in performance, and you give them a rigid 5 to 6 a.m. protocol, you're feeding their ego. It just gives them another metric to crush.
But it's not a metric for the sake of productivity. It's the cessation of a biological free fall.
It becomes a metric the moment they use it to shield themselves from vulnerability. The source material explicitly warns us about this. The entire framework was born out of a severe 300,000-pound collapse and the observation of failed companies due to fragmentation.
Right, the founder's collapse.
Yes, and the text explicitly states that mindset work without heart set equals cold confidence that pushes people away. Let's look at the language used to sell this morning protocol to the leader.
Okay.
We see strategic dominance, unshakable focus, building a cognitive command center. Doesn't this appeal directly to the exact toxic hustle culture that breaks these leaders in the first place?
Well, I think
A polished, disconnected persona can easily wake up at 5 a.m., endure 20 minutes of a brutal cold plunge, aggressively journal for 20 minutes, and read a business book. That does not mean they have reclaimed their true inner voice. It just means they've built a more impenetrable wall around it.
You are characterizing cognitive command as an ego trip, but let's look at what executive function actually is in the brain. Command, in a neurological sense, is the ability of the prefrontal cortex to govern the impulsive, fear-driven reactions of the amygdala.
Right.
It's the ability to pause and say, I am stressed, but I do not need to lash out at my operations manager. I do not need to make a fear-based decision right now. That pause is what this protocol establishes.
Okay, I see that.
And when that morning movement raises the heart rate, it intentionally increases brain-derived neurotrophic factor, or BDNF, by up to 300%. BDNF is essentially biological fertilizer for the brain. It creates the neuroplasticity required to form new thought patterns.
Sure.
You cannot expect a leader to engage in the deep, vulnerable work of finding their authentic voice if their brain literally lacks the physical plasticity to change its mind.
The plasticity is great, but plasticity just means the brain is highly moldable. It doesn't dictate the shape it takes. That is the sequencing problem here.
How so?
Consider the concept of the mortality meditation that comes much later in the framework on day 10. This is the shift from success to meaning. We all know the tragic archetype of the founder who was on track for an 8-figure exit, working 80-hour weeks, who suddenly realizes, I built something I don't even believe in anymore.
Yeah, they achieve everything and feel absolutely nothing.
Exactly. This is an existential crisis. To solve it, the framework asks the leader to imagine they have 6 months to live, to clarify their true impact and legacy. My argument is that without clarifying this North Star first, providing all that BDNF and cognitive clarity is just accelerating a car that is driving in the wrong direction.
Wait, let me push back on that analogy. The car isn't just driving in the wrong direction. The engine is smoking and the driver is actively having a panic attack at the wheel.
But handing them a map, the purpose, the meaning is what tells them to pull over. If you just fix the engine with cognitive protocols, they use that 300% cognitive boost to run faster down a path they subconsciously hate.
Ha! Well,
You are turning a scattered leader into a highly efficient lumberjack. They are still in the wrong forest, but now they are chopping down trees twice as fast with zero anxiety. The soul set, the deep connection to purpose and meaning, has to orient the mindset, not the other way around.
I love the lumberjack metaphor, I really do, but let's extend it. You are asking a leader who is severely sleep-deprived, dealing with stress-induced hypertension at 38 and entirely consumed by the immediate survival of their company, to suddenly map out the entire forest.
Because they have to know where they're going.
But biologically, they lack the cognitive capacity to answer a question as massive as, what do I stand for? When you are chronically exhausted, your worldview physically shrinks. Your brain limits your focus to the immediate threat, making payroll, appeasing the board. You cannot process a profound mortality meditation and envision your legacy at 85 years old if you are actively vibrating with anxiety about your Q3 revenue.
So you are saying they're too stressed for existential thought?
Precisely. The 20-20-20 protocol creates the physical clearing in the forest. It creates the physiological safety required for those existential questions to actually land. And the text itself supports this integrated logic. It says, your prefrontal cortex can't function without your heart coherence, and none of it matters without purpose anchoring the system. But sequence matters biologically. The mindset empire is the structural foundation that allows the soul set to be built without collapsing.
Okay, let's test that structural foundation in the real world, in the boardroom. How does this newly optimized identity actually manifest?
Well, we know that within a few days of stabilizing their morning routine, founders report making decisions with zero anxiety.
Right.
Their teams immediately notice a shift in their presence. They become more commanding.
And I don't dispute that the team notices a change, but I strongly challenge whether an anxiety-free decision is inherently an authentic one.
Why wouldn't it be? If you remove the fear of failure from the decision-making process, aren't you closer to what the leader actually wants?
Not necessarily. A sociopath makes anxiety-free decisions. Detachment from the outcome can look a lot like clarity, but it's often just emotional numbness.
That's a bit extreme.
But it's true. What truly shifts a company's culture is not a leader who has biohacked their way out of feeling stress. True culture shift happens through vulnerable leadership. It happens when a leader stands in front of their team and says, I am struggling, or I made a mistake. I don't have the answer right now, and I need your help.
Right, day 6 of the framework.
Exactly. That is true leadership identity, the willingness to be seen in your imperfection. And that requires immense emotional fluency, which a protocol focus on unshakable focus doesn't teach.
You are creating a false dichotomy between cognitive command and vulnerability, though. The text highlights a beautiful paradox. The more authentic you become, the more powerfully you lead.
Yes.
But to access that authenticity, to have the courage to stand in front of your team and admit a mistake, you must first have agency over your own mind. Think about the mental rehearsal techniques used early in the framework.
Okay.
A leader visualizes a calm response to a severe challenge because the brain cannot distinguish a vividly visualized experience from an actual experience. This reprograms the nervous system's default reaction to failure.
Right, building new pathways.
Yes, this stabilization fundamentally alters how a leader handles pressure. When they are no longer hijacked by their own internal panic, they actually have the bandwidth to notice the people around them.
I agree they have more bandwidth, but what do they do with it?
They had the cognitive space to be empathetic. The lock-in of those early cognitive protocols is what provides the psychological scaffolding required to hold the immense weight of genuine vulnerability.
I'm not so sure.
If you don't have the strength to hold your own mind steady, admitting a mistake to your team doesn't look like powerful vulnerability, it looks like a breakdown.
But that scaffolding only works if the leader is willing to completely abandon their commanding armor when it comes time to do the heart work. Look at the heart-brain coherence practices.
Okay, let's look at them.
This involves breathing techniques, followed by intentional heart focus, where the leader is asked to let suppressed emotions, anger, sadness, loneliness surface. Then they must practice coherent expression, like actually saying out loud, "I'm tired," or "I'm scared." This is radically antithetical to the strategic dominance programmed in the first hour of the day.
They're complementary, not antithetical.
They are complementary in theory, but in practice, for the typical high-achieving executive, the mindset feels safe. It feels like familiar territory, optimizing, controlling, executing.
Well, sure, it's comfortable for them.
Right. They will eagerly lock in the cognitive empire, build that scaffolding, and then fundamentally resist the hearts at work because it requires dismantling the very dominance they just perfected. If leadership identity is the way you lead when no one is watching, it requires deep emotional honesty.
I agree with that.
Focusing so heavily on the mindset first gives them permission to stop there. They become content in their newly optimized anxiety-free detachment, and the real transformation never happens.
Except the framework guards against this explicitly through daily integration. These practices aren't separated by months. They are integrated into the exact same morning architecture.
Yes, they are daily.
A 60-minute cognitive protocol can be immediately followed by 15 minutes of heart-brain coherence. The text argues that integration is the only way out of fragmentation. If a leader tries to do heart work without mindset work, they end up with profound emotional depth, but zero energy to execute. They become paralyzed by their own empathy. They feel everyone's pain but can't steer the ship. The cognitive command of the first hour isn't about building a wall of detachment. It is about generating the raw horsepower needed to drive the cultural change their heart is asking for.
Let's look at where that horsepower is coming from, though, because the framing matters immensely. Look at how we approach the health side, the physical recovery of the leader.
The sleep protocols.
Right, we are tearing down the sleep when you're dead lie. The protocols outline strict evening rituals, no screens before bed, a brain dump journal to empty the working memory, cooling the room temperature. This is vital, life-saving advice for an exhausted founder.
It absolutely is.
But listen to the language used to sell it. Recovery is your competitive advantage. We are still appealing to the performer.
Oh, I see where you're going.
We are telling them, rest, not because you are a human being worthy of peace, not because your family deserves you present, but because sleep makes you more anti-fragile in the marketplace. If every intervention, even sleep, is filtered through the lens of strategic advantage, when does a leader ever actually meet themselves?
You are looking at the language as a compromise of values. I see it as a necessary translation matrix. You have to speak the language of the native to guide them out of the country.
But do they ever leave the country if they are still speaking the language of optimization?
They do, because the biology forces the shift. If an executive has spent 20 years valuing themselves exclusively through the lens of market advantage, you use that exact vocabulary to introduce them to 8 hours of sleep and parasympathetic regulation.
I guess so.
But once they are actually sleeping, once their brain is finally clearing metabolic waste and consolidating learning, their physiology changes. When they engage in daily movement, it drops their baseline cortisol and floods their system with endorphins.
Right.
When that neurochemistry is finally balanced, the desperate need for the strategic advantage ego shield naturally starts to dissolve. They feel human again. You cannot think your way into a new way of acting. You have to act your way into a new way of thinking. The physical protocol is the action that changes the mind.
The ego does not dissolve simply because the neurochemistry improves, though. History is absolutely full of incredibly healthy, well-rested, cognitively sharp leaders who are deeply disconnected from their humanity and completely lack a moral compass.
Fear point.
Vitality does not equal integrity. This is why the connection to purpose and service is the actual mechanism of change. Consider the practice of shifting from a get mindset to a give mindset.
Ah, right.
Mentoring a young founder with zero expectation of a return on investment. Giving someone your absolute undivided presence. This moves the nervous system from a state of scarcity to a state of abundance. It is the true antidote to the hustle grind.
But if a leader's identity crisis is fundamentally born from a lack of meaning, then giving them cognitive command and physical vitality without addressing their scarcity mindset is just treating the symptoms. You're treating scarcity like it's purely a philosophical choice, ignoring the biological reality of what a scarcity mindset actually is.
Which is?
Scarcity is a prolonged state of sympathetic nervous system activation. You cannot simply command a biologically depleted cortisol-soaked executive to give freely and feel abundance.
Now,
Their brain, which is in survival mode, will perceive giving away time or energy as a massive threat, a loss of precious resources. You have to secure the physiological baseline first. When they own their first hour, when they secure their energy architecture through sleep and movement, they finally feel secure.
okay.
Only when a leader feels physically and mentally safe can true generosity emerge. Otherwise, mentoring someone just becomes another performative, resentful sacrifice on their calendar.
Okay, if we're talking about what makes a leader feel truly safe, we have to talk about unprocessed pain. Look at the practices around forgiveness.
Yeah, those are heavy.
This is where a leader is asked to address deep resentments, a bitter fallout with a co-founder, a demanding parent, or even forgiving themselves for past failures. When founders actually do this work, when they speak the release, the reports are always the same. I broke open, I felt 20 pounds lighter, I am a different leader now. This tells us something crucial. The heaviest burden on an executive's function isn't a lack of morning reading or a skipped cold plunge. It is unresolved emotional trauma. The armor they wear isn't just biological fatigue, it is psychological defense. If leadership identity is the core of who you are, then healing this unprocessed pain is the actual mechanism of transformation.
But notice the physical descriptions founders use when they experience that forgiveness breakthrough. I felt 20 pounds lighter. The tension released.
Right.
The emotional breakthrough is fundamentally a biological event, and I will maintain that this breakthrough is made vastly more accessible and safer because the leader has spent time regulating their amygdala and building cognitive capacity first.
It helps, certainly.
They've built the internal container required to tolerate the emotional flood that comes with confronting a bitter co-founder or their own failures. If you throw a burned-out, dysregulated leader straight into deep trauma release and forgiveness work without a stabilized cognitive command center, they won't process it.
Yeah, that's a risk.
They will likely disassociate, spiral, or just shut down completely. The morning protocol provides the anchor so they don't drown in the emotion.
We are circling the central paradox of this entire framework, which we both agree on. The more authentic you become, the more powerfully you lead.
Exactly.
But the journey there is incredibly fragile. I can see that the physical foundation matters deeply. Sleep, neuroplasticity, reducing cortisol, these are non-negotiable for human functioning. But we must remain deeply skeptical of the seductive pull of the mindset empire for high achievers.
I hear that.
It is far too easy for the modern executive to optimize their morning, biohack their recovery, proudly declare themselves healed, and completely bypass the messy work of the soul.
They mistake the cessation of panic for the presence of purpose.
Which brings us to the crux of our debate. We are examining a framework designed to rebuild an integrated human being out of someone who has fractured their life for the sake of professional success. My position remains that you cannot think, feel, or philosophize your way out of biological exhaustion. The crisis of leadership identity is just as much a crisis of physiology as it is a purpose. The early protocols owning the first hour, rewriting the neurobiology, serve as the mandatory command center. It is the physical, undeniable act of taking back control of one's own nervous system. It ensures the leader finally possesses the raw strength and clarity required to take off the armor, face their unresolved pain, and step into who they truly are.
And my position remains that while neurobiology undoubtedly provides the energy for the journey, it fundamentally does not provide the compass. A leader must remain hyper-aware that morning protocols, breathwork, and cognitive dominance are merely tools.
Right.
They are a means to an end, not the destination itself. The profound danger of starting with optimization is that it can seamlessly become a substitute for the vulnerable, often painful work of aligning your daily actions with your deepest values. True leadership identity isn't about being unshakable or perfectly optimized. It is about knowing exactly what you stand for and being willing to stand for it even when you are shaking.
I think we can both acknowledge the brilliance of Mousaab Khaldi's core theses here. Empires are not built in isolation. They're built through integration. A regulated nervous system without a soul is just a highly efficient machine.
Yeah.
But a soul without a regulated nervous system is a tragedy of unfulfilled potential. There is a vast amount more to explore in this material regarding exactly how the heart set and health set bridge this gap between cognitive clarity and true purpose.
Absolutely. The integration of all four is where the actual transformation lies, avoiding the trap of upgrading the armor while ignoring the person trapped inside it.
As you consider your own path, we leave you with this practical reflection drawn directly from the day one exploration. What part of your current leadership role feels most performed rather than true?